Welcome to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording this episode on Thursday, October 19th. And join me, as always, my partner, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Dr. O, from New Orleans, Louisiana today, sir. Nice to talk with you.
How you doing, my man? Listen, the food here is amazing.
This just in, Dr. O likes the food in NOLA. Somebody turned me on, not in the quarter. You got to wander away. Go to Giacomo's. It's what I think is my favorite secret New Orleans food spot. Today, as we're taping this, there's just a story that just came out that September home sales are at the lowest level since the foreclosure crisis of 2008. This comes on the heels of mortgage rates cresting 8%. You kind of follow the housing market just a little bit, right? In the work that you dabble in at Zillow. This can't be viewed as good news, can it?
Look, mortgage demand has fallen. And, we know that the market typically cools down this time of the year, but mortgage rates are 8%, man. Mortgage rates are 8%. So this should not be very surprising. We had a increase in nominal yields that pushed mortgage rates higher, and basically mortgage demand fell along with it. And so now we are at a time where not only demand usually slows, but now demand has slowed even more than it normally does for this time of year.
How about the supply side of that too?
That's right. There's a very, very important point to make is that ultimately mortgage rates so far have had a disproportionate larger impact on supply than on demand. And so supply has been fairly constrained. And we're seeing existing homes coming on the market have declined tremendously. And that's part of the reason why existing home sales continue to decline. There's just not enough homes coming on the market. Ultimately, demand still exceeds supply. And I know that because new home sales have continued to increase, right? So you have buyers out there that are essentially fewer buyers for sure, but they're essentially having to turn to new construction because there's just not enough existing homes on the market. Housing inventory is down roughly 40%. Existing home inventory is down 40% when compared to before the pandemic. The inventory decline is a combination of basically less supply, fewer homes coming on the market, but also whatever homes are on the market, demand is literally just absorbing it. Right. And of course, that translates to price growth, positive price growth. Right. Now, in September, what's interesting is because of the increase in mortgages, the surprise increase in mortgage rates from, everybody thought mortgages were going to be around 7%. Well, now they are at 8%. Right. So all of a sudden they've risen again. Price growth actually turned negative in September, according to the Zillow Home Value Index. And the share of listings with a price cut has actually gone up, in September as well. And so that basically tells me demand has slowed, right? Now, the markets that are doing well are markets that are relatively more affordable. And those are the markets that I think, where you're still seeing some pretty strong home value appreciation. They're in the Midwest, they're like some are on the East Coast, like Hartford, Connecticut, Milwaukee, Providence, Rhode Island, Virginia Beach, Philadelphia. Those are markets that are still moving. They're relatively more affordable, and you're still seeing a lot of action there. Markets that have slowed the most are Austin, Las Vegas, Phoenix, markets where basically home values relative to incomes are just too high. But I think ultimately the most important thing we should probably tell our listeners is that this is very similar to the 1980s housing market.
When we were just chatting pre-show, you said this is reminding you of the late 70s and early 80s, which I lived through that. It was a miserable time. I mean, there were things that were going on in the world that were very, I mean, we had hostages in Iran at about that time, 1979, 1980. Beyond that, there was a pretty significant recession going on, an economic recession. It was localized to where I grew up because of what was going on, inside of the steel industry, and that was, but it was just not fun for anyone. Why is this like that, in your opinion?
Well, let me just fix that up a little bit. Let me explain. It's not as bad, right? It's the dynamics. The dynamics. What's reminding me of the 80s. And my friend Odetta Kushi from the First American Bank wrote a nice little paper summarizing the dynamic, right? You had a supply constrained market back then, which was similar to today. Existing home sales fell nearly 50% from their peak in 1978 to the trough in 1982. Home prices also had surged by over 14% in 1978. Again, very similar to what we're seeing today, right? Home sales are facing downward pressure. The home sales fell 40% from the peak in January 2022. Prices had climbed to 17% on an annual basis in 2022, right? You have basically millennials aging into home buying. Back then, it was baby boomers aging into home buying. And so you have all of these factors that are very similar. You have the supply constraint, but that's the extent. And you had inflation, right? Inflation was crazy in the late 70s due to supply shocks. COVID-19 kind of gave us a similar situation where we had massive supply shocks. Inflation peaked at 9%, the highest in 40 years, in mid of 2022, right? And inflation has come down substantially now, right? So the problem's almost resolved. We don't have a hostage crisis. We don't even have, this past summer, we saw oil prices rising, and now they're coming down again. So we're nowhere near the magnitude of the troubles that the country faced in the 70s or the 80s or the early 80s. So we've course corrected pretty rapidly, and I think we're in much better shape today than we were back then. But I think it's interesting to point out that the dynamics are very, very similar, and that ultimately the housing sales are going to recover, especially given that inflation's pretty much under control. I mean, it's coming down. Some people will argue, well, it's still too high. Well, okay, yes, it's still too high, but yields have increased significantly in the last month or two, and the labor market's still cooling. Wage growth is subsiding. The Fed's nearly done, if not done already. So we're almost there. We're almost there.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always. For Dr. Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.